there's some stuff happening, and this, you'll recall, those of you who've been listening to this program for, years and years, you will remember back in 2007, I believe it was the second quarter of 2007, by coincidence, I was reading a book about the Great Depression. It was a history about the Great Depression, a history of the Great Depression. And in fact, it was written in the 50s. And so it was written by somebody who lived through it. And it was really a vibrant. I'm sorry, I can't tell you the author or the title because it was, 8 years ago and 9 years ago. And I just don't remember. It was next to my bed and when we were living in Portland. And since we've moved, most of my books have gone into storage. But in any case, the story that I was reading in this book was about how housing starts were collapsing. This was in 1927. Housing starts, there had been this huge bubble from 1921 to 1927 in real estate. I mean, there's also a huge bubble in the stock market. But the real estate bubble was actually even much larger. To the point that down in Florida, in parts of Florida, like in Miami, for example, literally people were setting up corner stands, like Lucy's lemonade stand. They'd set up a little cardboard or 2x4 corner stack on a shack on a not even a shack, just a stand, like a Kool-Aid stand on the corner of a street and buy and sell deeds, property. People would go down to Florida. They'd buy a lot, say buy a lot for $100, and then a week later they'd sell it for $110, and buy another lot and sell that one for $120. Because housing values were going up so fast, the people were just flipping these things like this. It was like get rich quick stuff, and it had spread out of Florida around 24, 25, all the way up the East Coast by 1927. And as I recall, second quarter 27. I'd have to go back and fact check this, but I'm guessing some of you probably know the history of the Great Depression much better than I and might know month by month, blow by blow. But the point is, I was reading in this book about how, as I recall, second or third quarter 27, there was about a 30% decrease in housing starts that quarter, which had not happened before. And it was reported in the New York Times. And it was reported in this book. And as I'm reading that, every night I read myself to sleep. I was reading that book that night. The next morning I get up, I go into the radio studio to do my radio program, and I'm doing my research. And here's this story in the Financial Times or the Wall Street Journal or whatever, one of the publications, where the rich people talk to the rich people about how in the U.S. in 2007, in the second or third quarter, housing starts had dropped by something like 24%, something in that neighborhood. And I was like, whoa, we've seen this movie before. I mean, I wasn't old enough to see it, but, my dad was born I guess he was born in 29, as I recall. So, sort of even didn't really see the whole, the bubble and the crash, although his parents did. And I was like, okay, now is probably not a good time to be buying a house, and now is probably not a good time to be in the stock market. And I went on the air and said that, and we had an advertiser who was a mortgage company, and they were doing, the pump and dump kind of thing. I mean, they were doing refis. For regardless of your credit, you too can get your house and just so that they could sell them to the big banksters who were turning them into collateralized debt obligations, CDOs, and derivatives. So I said at the time, I'm getting out of the stock market. I think you should too. And for the next 6 months, a year, people would call in and laugh at me and say, how's that going with you? Hey, I just made an extra $1,000 on my stock. And I'm like, I'm just sitting here. I mean, I am not a millionaire. I'm not rich, but Louise and I have hopefully enough set aside for retirement that, we could do it. But it is, and it was like, I'm just out of the stock market. I'm going to keep my money in my checking account or in my savings account or in bonds. And it turned out that I was right. And I'm sort of back there right now in the same place. And in fact, I wrote a book about it, The Crash of 2016, about, why this is we're going to see these cycles over and over and over again because we haven't undone the damage that Phil Gramm did in 1999 and in 2000. So let me share with you, Ian, given that setup, let me share with you just a couple of stories in the last 24 hours in the New York Times and the Financial Times. This one particularly alarmed me. The headline: investors flock to CDSs. CDSs are bets. They're credit default swaps. They're insurance, basically. Credit default swap means that if you have sold a bond, if you have a loan, and I want to bet that it might go bad, I will buy an insurance policy against that. It's called a credit default swap. Okay? So when investors think that a stock or an industry is going south, they start buying CDSs like there's no tomorrow. With me so far? Joe Remison in New York City and Gavin Jackson in London wrote this piece for today's Financial Times. Investors are rushing to buy protection against banks' declining bond prices, amplifying concerns over the health of financial companies. That comes as a popular trading index tracking the likelihood of default of financial companies' senior debt. And senior debt, that's the financial companies' largest and oldest bonds, debts out there. Saw almost $6 billion of trading on Monday. Other credit default swap indexes are also experiencing high trading volumes this week. Okay, so there's that story. Then there's this from the Deal Book, Peter Evis over the New York Times. The headline: nervousness about global banking giants intensifies. And this is why, back in the day, back in 2008, Arianna Huffington and I, independent of each other, she was recommending, as I recall, over at Huffington Post, that people move their money out of the 6 big banks and into local community-owned banks. And I was recommending that people move them into credit unions, because a credit union is the most egalitarian, the most small d democratic. You actually, when you put your money in a credit union, you become one of the stockholders of the credit union, effectively. So here's this is from the New York Times. The headline: nervousness about global banking giants intensifies. An unsettling trend has emerged from the heavy selling that sent global markets tumbling this year. Investors are getting nervous about the world's biggest banks. Shares in banking giants are plunging. Ominous signs in the market that investors used to bet on the perceived creditworthiness of large financial firms. To watch more clips from our programs, hit the Watch More Videos button over here. And please be sure to hit the handy-dandy subscribe button so you'll always be up to date. Tag, you're it.